Somewhere after a big inner shift, a new kind of tiredness can appear. Not the kind that comes from doing too much or feeling too little. It's stranger than that. It's the fatigue of being registered, the fatigue of being looked at and quietly filed away, of hearing your own name and feeling a small tightening, as if a string has been pulled that attaches you back to a whole history you didn't ask to carry today. Even friendly attention can start to feel heavy. A message that means well, a question that assumes continuity, or a memory someone brings up like a shared photograph. It's not that any of this is wrong. It just begins to feel like a demand, to step into shape, to become legible, to return as the person people think they know. And the exhaustion isn't only social, it's internal too. Because once the mind has seen the machinery of identity, it can't unsee it. Every introduction, every preference, every "this is me" starts to feel like labor. What's unsettling is how clean the fantasy becomes. No explanation, no recognizable outline, no story attached. Not as an escape from life, but as a wish to exist without being pinned down by it. A wish to move through the day without leaving a trail of meaning behind you that someone else will follow back to your door. Some people call this wanting anonymity. But it's not just privacy. It's relief from self-reference itself. If you've been through what many describe as ego death, whether through meditation, crisis, psychedelics, or a slow, relentless clarity, this fatigue can arrive as an aftershock. Ego death is often talked about like a liberation, and sometimes it is. But it can also reveal something that's hard to live with. How much energy the psyche spends maintaining a person. How much subtle effort goes into being coherent, consistent, and recognizable, especially when the old belief in that coherence has cracked. Before, identity worked like a protective shell. Not because it was false in a simple way, but because it gave structure. It gave a center of gravity. It allowed you to move through the world without constantly feeling the raw openness of experience. After the shell breaks, awareness can feel exposed. It's like standing outside in weather you didn't notice before. The same day is happening, the same streets, the same conversations, but now you can feel how much of being someone is performance, and how much of it is negotiated with other people's expectations. This is where Carl Jung becomes useful, not as a badge of authority, but as someone who understood that the mind doesn't only have thoughts, it has costumes. Jung used the word persona for the social face we develop, the mask that helps us function among others. Most of the time, the persona is not a lie. It's a tool. It lets you be a friend, a student, a worker, a partner. It gives you a role so you don't have to improvise your entire existence from scratch every morning. But Jung also warned, gently and repeatedly, that the persona can become a prison when it is mistaken for the whole self. And that's what an ego death experience tends to expose. It shows the mask as a mask. It reveals the difference between what you are in your depths and what you have learned to present. The moment that difference becomes visible, the persona can start to feel unbearable. Not because it was evil, but because it suddenly feels like a constant translation. Experience happens in one language, and then you must translate it into a stable character that others can recognize. And recognition has a cost. To be recognized is to be interpreted. To be remembered is to be held in someone else's version of your story. To be labeled is to have your complexity reduced into something carryable. Even when people are kind, they still do this. They have to. It's how human minds work. They compress what they can't hold. They turn living, changing reality into a manageable symbol. After ego death, that compression can feel suffocating. Not because you want to reject people, and not because you can't handle life, but because you can feel the gap between what you are and what gets perceived. And you can feel how often you have to cooperate with that perception to keep everything smooth. You start noticing the small adjustments, the way you keep your tone consistent with who you are. The way you maintain preferences you no longer feel strongly. The way you smile at an old version of yourself so someone else doesn't feel confused. This is ego identification fatigue. It isn't sadness, and it isn't burnout. It's the psyche getting tired of propping up a center that no longer feels solid. Jung would say the ego needs continuity. It needs a story that doesn't break, because continuity gives control. But the psyche also needs truth. And after the illusion of a fixed self has been pierced, the old continuity begins to feel like a demand to pretend. So the urge to vanish appears, not as an urge to leave life, but to loosen the hook, to stop being dragged back into a named identity every time you enter a room, to exist for a while without a biography pressed against your skin, to be present without being someone. And when that urge shows up, it can be confusing because it doesn't come with despair. Sometimes it comes with a clean, almost neutral sense of relief, like stepping out of a costume after wearing it for years and realizing how tight it's been. When identity stops feeling true, it doesn't disappear. It keeps arriving anyway, through other people, through language, through memory. The name still works. The face still gets recognized. The past still gets referenced. And that's part of what makes this phase so draining. The psyche has already stepped out of full belief, but life keeps handing the mask back, as if nothing changed. This is why vanishing can start to look like relief. Not the relief of being left alone, and not the relief of rest. More like the relief of not being assembled. Because so much of everyday existence is an assembly process. A person meets you, and immediately the mind forms a shape. They recall your patterns, they attach expectations, they anticipate your reactions. Even when it's affectionate, it still creates a frame, and after ego death, frames can feel like weight. Jung's idea of the persona helps here again. The persona isn't only a social mask, it's also a structure that keeps your inner life from spilling everywhere. It edits you. It selects what is shareable. It gives you a consistent angle so other people can relate to you without having to meet the full mystery of your inner world each time. Most of the time, that's not a problem. It's necessary. The problem begins when you can feel the editing happening moment by moment. When you can feel yourself choosing what to reveal, shaping your voice, maintaining continuity, smoothing contradictions, not out of deception, but out of a basic agreement with the world. I will be interpretable. After ego death, that agreement can start to feel expensive, because the psyche has tasted something less defined, something that doesn't need to be consistent to be real, and now the demand for consistency can feel like a narrowing. You may notice this in small moments. Someone asks how you've been, and the question doesn't land as a request for information. It lands as a request for a narrative, a beginning, middle, and end. A stable protagonist. Or someone says, "That's so you." And instead of feeling seen, you feel pinned. Not because they're wrong, but because the phrase creates a boundary around what you are allowed to be. It turns your living present into a predictable pattern. Identity fatigue often shows up as sensitivity to being defined. Compliments can carry it. Criticism can carry it. Even curiosity can carry it. Because each one says, in its own way, "Become a describable object so I can hold you." After the old sense of self has softened, being held that way can feel intrusive, like being translated into a language you no longer speak. This is where roles become heavy. Roles aren't merely social, they're psychic commitments. When you accept a role, friend, partner, achiever, helper, the responsible one, the funny one, the one who's doing well, the one who's struggling, you accept a set of expectations that other people will unconsciously enforce. You also enforce them on yourself. You begin monitoring your behavior to keep the role intact. That monitoring is usually invisible until it isn't. After ego death, monitoring becomes harder to ignore. You start to feel the subtle surveillance you've been living under, the surveillance of your own self-image, and the surveillance of the image reflected back by others. It can feel like carrying a mirror everywhere, having to check it constantly so you don't slip out of character. The exhaustion isn't from life's tasks. It's from maintaining the curator. And then there's history. Names, backgrounds, previous opinions, old relationships, the timeline people associate with you. History can start to feel like a net. Not because you resent your past, but because being remembered creates gravity. It pulls you toward a version of yourself that was constructed in contexts you may no longer inhabit internally. You might feel that gravity most when someone speaks about you with certainty. You've always been like this. Even if they mean it warmly, a part of you may go still, because you can feel how that sentence seals you into a story. Jung wrote about the ego's need for continuity. The ego wants to say, "This is me, and I remain myself across time." It needs that continuity to navigate the world and to feel in control. But the deeper psyche isn't always interested in continuity. It's interested in wholeness. And wholeness often requires admitting what doesn't fit the storyline. Contradictions, changes, unexplainable impulses, moods that don't match the brand, truths that don't keep the mask polished. When ego death happens, even in a partial way, it often reveals that the solid self was never as solid as it felt. The self was a process, alive, shifting, responding. Seeing that can be freeing, but it can also remove a kind of insulation. Without the old belief in a fixed identity, you may feel exposed to the rawness of being perceived. The world looks the same, but the internal contract has changed. You can't fully return to the innocence of just being your persona, because you can sense the persona as a construction. So the longing to vanish is a longing to stop negotiating with that construction, to stop being pulled into the market of interpretation, to stop offering yourself up as a consistent product, to exist without needing to